Parents who disown their child, why? Story 1. Since it seems to have widened a bit, a family torn apart, based on an aunt and her niece. Aunt starts showing signs of dementia at a relatively young age, and is moved into an assisted living home. Niece, who bounces around jobs, gets hired to go visit her about once a week, take her out to the mall, or walk in the park, whatever. Paid handsomely. We get an alert that aunt has a check bounce from her account that should have $5,000 in it. Niece has drained the account. Proven beyond a doubt with receipts. Niece would take aunt to aunt's bank machine every Friday and withdraw $200, then fill her car with gas, aunt can't drive, and charge us hours when she clearly didn't spend hours with her aunt. She charged us, claiming she took aunt to appointments. There was no appointment. We can actually call the doctor, FYI. The family rifts? For some bizarre reason, my niece's family took her side. Of course they took her side. I'll bet in their minds, the niece earned it. Niece was doing the unpleasant and sometimes emotionally or mentally draining work of visiting and entertaining a family member suffering from dementia. It saved them from having to set aside time to do it themselves. Everybody wins, right? Ugh, it's worse than that. We had them stone cold with evidence. I would never fill up my car with gas. We called the gas station and got the receipt for multiple visits. I know how many gallons you bought. I know you charged us money for time spent here, but I was with her that day. What they claim to take her side on is that we shouldn't have emailed her with the accusation. We should phone her. What the heck? I guess they mean that we should not have had a record of what she said. They were also mad that the rest of the family found out the niece was a thief. But we didn't know that when the first check bounced, and we naturally talked about it with family. Oh no, a check bounced. What's going on? Do you know anything? Story 2. My family disowned me because I disowned my mother. I was groomed and tortured by her husband for years, and when I finally told her, she not only didn't believe me, but stayed married to him for 7 years. I had to move out at 16 to get away from how I was being treated. Then, when I finally began speaking to others, she started to cover her back with her social circle by telling them that I seduced her husband. I cut her off for years, and didn't ever want to see her again. But my family bullied me to just get over it and have a relationship with my mother, and that I was hurting her. Even my sister, who knew what happened, knew I stayed for so long to protect her, fell into a trap of my mother whining to everyone around her and painting me as a liar. About 4 years ago, she was very suddenly diagnosed with advanced cancer and didn't have much time. I was moving out of my home state, and everyone told me I needed to see her before I left, that I needed to be there, but I didn't want to. In the end, everyone turned their back on me. They were so mad I wouldn't just forget my trauma just to say goodbye to someone I hadn't loved for a long time, and rightly so. Edit. I'm getting a lot of replies, so I just want to say thank you and send you all virtual hugs. I'm okay now. I'm grown up, and though I was set back in a lot of ways, life-wise, I came out on top for the best. Anyone who is also experiencing this, you aren't alone. Hey dear, I'm in the same boat. I have some siblings who know the truth, who were also abused, but not assaulted like I was, and are also no contact. But my little sister, stepfather is her real father, basically said it was just one time, so I need to let it go. It wasn't one effing time, and the fact that my mother admits it all happened now, but is downplaying it, infuriates me more. You know what? We've loved our mothers long after they've deserved our love, extended them so many chances, and they've just crapped on us. I miss my sister, but I don't think I would even return for my mom's funeral. I'm done pretending she's a good person. By not pretending, I've taken my life back. While I feel for both of these people, I do need to address an assumption that commonly gets made in stories like these. A lot of people are very quick to assume that mothers who protect the men who mistreat their daughters simply don't care about their kids as much as they care about their husbands. But while that's sadly true in some cases, it can also be a lot more complicated than that. It should go without saying that a man who's willing to mistreat one person is likely willing to mistreat others as well. And there's usually a fair amount of gaslighting or other forms of manipulation that go into it as well. On top of that, many women who wind up with rotten men suffer from severe codependency, as well as any number of other mental or behavioral issues. This often makes them easier to manipulate than most. It's easy to say that if they cared, they'd rise above all that, but that's really easy to say from the outside. And even those who have been in that situation themselves and done right by their daughters don't know exactly what it looks like from the perspective of those who did wrong. I'm not saying that what these mothers did was right, but we should never presume to know where it comes from. Story 3. As Jehovah's Witnesses, my parents disowned my siblings and I several times since I was in my late teens. One of the Jehovah's Witnesses' rules is that you do not associate with others who know the truth but refuse to follow it, including family, and parents are encouraged to disown any children who have left the religion. The first time was when I was 19. It upset me. I was heartbroken, and eventually they changed their minds, only to do it again a couple years later, and so on, until I stopped caring and no longer attempted to be a part of their lives at all. Was seeing a girl in high school. Her family was Jehovah's Witness, but she didn't really care. I really liked her, and it was fun. Then she disappeared. Her dad found out, and she was sent to live with her grandmother, never to see her again. Her sister managed to let me know what happened, and that the girl was sorry. Really bummed me out for a couple years. I dated this Jehovah's Witness girl briefly. We went to her place to watch a boxing match in the mid-90s. I was really sweet to her. She was really cool. Some of the other Jehovah's Witness people were there, and they seemed okay, polite and everything. Then, directly after the fight, her dad insisted he drive me home at 95 miles per hour like evil freaking Knievel on a Kawasaki dirt bike, weaving like a madman on the freeway. He pulled up in front of my folks' driveway. I got off the bike and handed him the helmet, a little shook. It was only my second time on a motorcycle ever. He stared me down like he was going to attack me. He kept eye contact as he shook his head slowly. He pointed at me. "You get it?" he said. I got it. She was really cool, but she was off limits. The same thing happened when I dated a Creole girl, except her grandmother loudly asked what the heck I was doing there. Story 4. My ex-wife disowned my son. We both married young when I was in the military, high school sweethearts. She became pregnant 6 months into our marriage. I don't think she connected with him at all after he was born. The most she did with him was Instagram photo shoots, where she painted herself as #1 mommy. When he turned 3, I left the military. A year after that, she ran for the hills. I remember it like it was yesterday. I sat down with her at a local restaurant to talk divorce plans. We split all of our financials and material items down the middle. We finally got custody for my kiddo, something I dreaded to discuss because fathers never gain custody in my area, and she tells me I want absolutely no responsibility. I was taken back, and I asked if she was sure. She was. That one sentence hurt me more than anything else that happened during that time. My biological father wanted nothing to do with me, and now I was seeing it happen with my own child's, but with his mother. I received full custody, and she married within a year afterwards. She had another child, too. Her parents try their best to be a part of his life, but she still does her best to avoid him. He's 7 now and used to it, but I know it weighs heavily on him. It sucks, but it's life, I guess. I don't usually share something as personal as that. My kiddo is a very awesome kid that has shown great resilience beyond his years. He has rolled through the tough times better than even I. I can just hope he doesn't question his worth because of what his mom did. I know I questioned mine due to my own father leaving, and that has left scars that will not heal. I don't like being too quick to hand out an armchair diagnosis for much of anything, since Reddit has enough people doing that already, but this really sounds like she had severe postpartum depression and just never got over it. Not only can it last for years, but it can take as many as 3 years to even really present itself. And since that's when she ran, she'd be out of his life before it even wore off. I could easily be wrong about all this, but it's hard to think of another explanation. The only other simple one is that she just didn't want to be a mother, but that doesn't make a lot of sense in light of the fact that she stayed around for her second child. Story 5. I wouldn't say I've disowned or stopped loving my son, but it's real tough to find love for him. He's almost 14 next month, and he's currently out of our home at a treatment facility. He's averaged 2 arrests a year for the last 2 years, and he's attacked my wife several times, our daughters several times, and the neighborhood kids several times. He ran away from school, ran away from home, and tried to push me off the roof of our house after threatening to jump off and hurt himself. We have become that family in our town, where the police are called to our home on a semi-regular basis. He's been getting more violent as he gets older, not to mention bigger and stronger, and I honestly don't see an end in sight. The key fact I'm leaving out is that he's been diagnosed as high-functioning autistic and is also bipolar. That's like putting walls around a tornado and expecting it to stay inside the walls. A lot of what has occurred he has little control over because of the way his mind is, where he's constantly at war with himself, structure versus chaos. And my wife and I have tried desperately to give him the best life we can while keeping ourselves and our daughters safe. But I'm tired. It's been 8.5 years we've been going through this with him, and I've been ready to throw in the towel on him for a while. But my wife refuses to let him go. So we wake up every morning trying to give him the best life for him and our girls. My brother has the same combo and was in a similar situation at that age. He's 10 years older now and studying for a PhD and engaged to a wonderful woman. I'm not promising that it will get better, but it can. I've seen it happen. We've got hope that he'll normalize, so to speak, after he gets through puberty, and we've heard of numerous success stories when individuals get older. As they say, sometimes it's hard to see the forest through the trees. I'm really hoping he can have a happy adulthood. Story 6. My parents disowned my oldest sister. She always struggled growing up more than us. She became a teen mom with a bad older dude, partied a lot, etc. But my parents helped her a lot. They do okay for themselves, but had a no co-signing rule for all 6 of my siblings and I. Still, they co-signed for her house so she could get a head start. She didn't pay the mortgage for almost 3 years before my mom got served in front of all the other nurses at her work. My parents worked tirelessly to try to work out deals where my sister and her family kept the house and got some leniency, but to no avail, because my sister never showed up for court dates. During this time, she paid $12,000 for IVF and got pregnant with her 5th kid. When my mom demanded some of the money back, she accused my dad and my brother of beating her sons when my parents took them to Disney World. He didn't, and said she'd file a police report if he asked for money again. They kept asking because it wasn't true. She awkwardly joined us for Christmas and punched my brother in the face during the meal for humiliating her oldest son by asking him if he wanted to work at my brother's company for good pay. Her oldest son is in and out of jail, and my brother was trying to help him after his release. But her son said he didn't want a job and got mad. She then called the cops and told them the same brother had illegal guns in his truck, and they came on Christmas night and searched his truck. No guns found. This sort of thing must be absolutely heartbreaking for a parent to go through. The thing about Reddit is that since there are a lot of younger users, the sister could tell a twisted version of this from her side, and there would be commenters telling her how awful her parents are and that she should cut off contact. But for a parent, having a kid like this can be tough. They try so hard to help her, not entirely realizing, although perhaps suspecting, that they were just enabling her more and more. Even if they did fully realize it, that doesn't make it easier to let your child suffer the consequences of their actions, when those consequences could include homelessness or legal repercussions. So they just kept writing checks. They finally found the line they couldn't let her cross, but it meant finally letting go of a child they'd been bending over backwards to keep in their lives, even when it was clearly hurting them. I don't envy any parent who gets put in that position. Story 7. I have been legally disowned by my father. When I was 11, my mom was diagnosed with terminal cancer. This was her 2nd diagnosis in around 4 years. Obviously, she recovered the first time after her intense surgery and a lot of chemo, and he did not want to look after her like he did before. He also had a new girlfriend and her family to look after, apparently, and he had no issues leaving us. When my mom passed away when I was 14, my brother, grandmother, him and I met up to discuss who I was going to live with. The plan was my brother and his family, father was never considered, and he showed up and declared that he was in the process of going to court to legally emancipate himself from me. He went out of his way to legally declare that I was no longer his child, just so that my brother, 22-year-old with a wife and 2 young children already struggling on 1 paycheck, couldn't seek child support. Needless to say, it stung, coming only days after my mother's funeral. What a jerk. Hugs to you. Peace to your mom. Knowing her child doesn't have to be around that monstrous a-hole anymore pretty much guarantees this. Story 8. My mother and her sister were both adopted into a great family. Recently, my grandfather fell ill, and we were told to prepare to say goodbye. So the family gathered. My grandmother has had a hard time with her memory since she had a brain hemorrhage, but she welcomed my aunt into her home during this tough time. Whilst my grandfather was in his final week, Aunt Wendy took my grandmother's ATM card and proceeded to spend well over $1,000 on herself and get herself a motel room. She also attempted to steal their car. When my uncles found out, she basically disappeared into the wind. After my grandfather passed and his funeral was all sorted, my grandmother went to an attorney to write Wendy out of any inheritance she would get from their estate when she passes. She didn't press any formal charges because the whole process would have been lengthy and more painful for her. She didn't need the extra stress. I'm pretty sure one of my uncles also threatened Wendy to make sure she stayed away from my grandmother from now on too. Stealing from the deceased or near deceased is one of the lowest things a human being can do. It is, and yet it's disgustingly common. The sad fact is that some people just aren't that close to their families and don't have any heart for them. All they see is what they stand to inherit one day. This isn't a living, breathing person without whose kindness they might not even be alive, or in this simple case, wouldn't have grown up loved. All this person is to them is a paycheck waiting to happen, and sometimes people can't be bothered to wait. There's no excuse to dehumanize anyone to that extent, but it's especially tragic when people do it to their own family. Story 9. A little different. I was disowned, but I deserved it. I was an addict and a mess for a long time. My mom couldn't keep bailing me out of trouble and watch me self-destruct anymore. I wasn't living at home. She came to see me one last time to tell me she was done. Not to contact her. She would no longer have anything to do with me. She was in pieces. I can't imagine how hard it must have been for her. But it was the best thing she ever did for me. Once she cut me off, my rock bottom came hard and fast. After a little while of living on the streets and my addiction consuming me, I made my way to a detox center, got a few days clean under my belts, and never looked back. That was almost 15 years ago. After I was clean a little while, I contacted my mom, and little by little we built a relationship again, and now we're really close. I am forever grateful to my mom for letting me fall and letting me back into her life. That's beautiful. I second this. It's also great to read a story where a kid acknowledges that they had a part in the story and takes responsibility. All too often, it's accepted that kids are and forever will be the victims of their parents, and the reverse isn't as welcomed unless the child is clearly a psychopath. That can really fail to account for the parent's humanity. Story 10. My biological father divorced my mom and also his 3 kids, basically bouncing out of our lives and making it clear he wanted next to nothing to do with any of us when he left. Man, years later, at my older sister's funeral that he had the effing gall to attend, I asked him why he did that. He said, I thought it would be easier for everyone. He actually meant it was easier for him to run home to his wealthy family and enjoy a second adolescence while my single mother worked 2 jobs to feed 3 kids under 10 with 0 child support from him. Our fathers are 2 in the same. Cruddy. Make it 3. Father came from money, so he took off to live the easy life while my mom worked 2 jobs while going to community college. After 30 years, dude sent a message through my aunt that if we ever wanted to meet, he'd like to. Even after all that time, dude still can't face things on his own. Story 11. Not a parent, but my parents stopped loving me the moment I was disfellowshipped as a Jehovah's Witness, and I was promptly kicked out. I knew nothing of how to live on my own at the time, but I had a decent job and survived. My brother stopped associating with them 2 years later and lives with me, and they have since moved away, 1,500 miles away to be exact. It's easier to tell people I'm an orphan or that I do not have parents, because it's hard to explain how they would stop loving or want to associate with their own son over some stupid cult rules. I've seen so much of this with Jehovah's Witness families, it seems like a horrible cult. It really doesn't seem like a true religion after reading some of these stories. I feel like I've seen a lot of this with Jehovah's Witnesses in this thread alone. It's odd, having met some former witnesses whose families do still talk to them. It never even occurred to me that might be the norm. On the whole, I have no problem with religion and think people should believe whatever makes them happy, but if you're being pressured by your religious peers to abandon your loved ones over nothing more than what they believe, then it might be time to question whether that gels with the message of a guy who advocated turning the other cheek against those who strike you, because it seems like it probably doesn't. Believe whatever you think makes you a better person, but at least try to be consistent about your moral values. Story 12. My father said my mother's issue was that she had too many children and it gave her some kind of brain fever, much like a dog that loses its mind after having too many puppies. My mother said my father felt trapped by me. He was planning to leave when it was just my 2 older brothers, and then my mother got pregnant with me, and he felt obligated to stay. Now that I'm an adult with 2 kids myself, I think I realize that both of my parents are just extremely mentally ill and incapable of loving anyone, including themselves. Yeah, eesh, just 3 kids? I thought maybe we were talking a couple dozen here. A dog that loses its mind after having too many puppies? Is that even a thing? Story 13. I have disowned my oldest son. He molested my daughter, has been diagnosed as a sociopath, and we have restraining orders against him. It isn't fun, and I never thought I would be that parent. Dated a girl for a long time who had been molested by her father for years growing up. Her parents tried the whole, we need to move on, forgive him, he's our son. It's messed her up having to see him at holidays. She was cutting, drinking herself to sleep, almost destroyed a very beautiful and amazing person. It got better when he went to federal prison for making and distributing child pornography and sleeping with so many underage girls. You absolutely made the right choice. Sorry you had to make it. It makes me so sad to hear this is the norm instead of what we chose to do. I'm so sorry for her. I'm actually not positive that this is the norm. There are 2 things you need to remember about stories like this. First of all, the stories on Reddit that gain the most traction tend to be the most dramatic. Somewhere along the way, social media became a tool for angry people to find ways of justifying their constant outrage, and a lot of Reddit stories are a prime example of that. Second, if most of your exposure to Reddit is through YouTube, then the threads you're hearing about were chosen for entertainment value. So those also frequently skew toward drama. It's certainly sad that a lot of people would expose their own daughter to that sort of ongoing trauma, but calling it the norm might be a stretch. I can't say for sure that it isn't, but assuming that it is won't make it any easier for anyone to sleep tonight. Story 14. I love my son, but he abused me. When he turned that violence on to his sister by choking her, I had to say goodbye. I wish my mom had done that to my brother sometimes. She saw it all, but what hurt the most was having my parents, the people who are supposed to protect me, ask me to forgive my attacker, just because he happened to be my brother. If anyone else had done that to me, they would have gone nuts on them. But he's blood, so it cancels out, I guess. Same for me. They saw him doing horrible things to me and laughed, stopped me from getting help by lying to the person I talked about the abuse to, super bad handling of the case, and told me to not make such a big deal out of it. I disowned them because clearly my safety and health did not matter to them. Story 15. Not my story, but in a similar thread to this one, asking parents about when they realized they raised a monster. Someone linked to this post. The son was a jerk as a teen, but took it way further by eventually raping his own mother, who ended her own life a year after. There it is. Surprised I had to go so far down to see it. Heck, I forgot about this story. I remember once in a blue moon about the story, but not the part about what he did to his mother. I always got that and the Colby story mixed up somehow. Sometimes you have to be the change you want to see in the world. Get some initiative, make her disappear. It's the only way. On a serious note, I know exactly what you're talking about. It is exhausting to say the least. If you're wondering what that one commenter means when they mention the Colby story, it's from another Ask Reddit thread. But unlike the usual shtick where someone asks a broad question and gets a ton of different replies, this one was by a parent asking what he should do about his teenage son sleeping with the family dog. It was locked forever ago, but it lives on in the Best of Redditor Updates subreddit. Feel free to search for it, although why you'd want to read that story knowing what it's about is your own business. I read this stuff for a living, and even I couldn't make it too far into that one. Story 16. I've disowned one of my siblings. Still have 5 other siblings. My sister is just a horrible person. She's the youngest of the 7, and she's been rotten since she was a teenager. She's much younger than the rest of us, so while the other 6 grew up together, she was almost like an only child. She treats everybody in her life like they're here to serve her needs. Some of the things she's put our mother through are truly horrible. I wouldn't give a dang if she disappeared forever. Story 17. I'm not sure if this counts. I didn't disown him, but I went through a dissociative episode after some really intense trauma, and I honestly couldn't feel any attachment and parental love that I had for my son. I tried not to show it and behave as normally as possible because he was a child at the time and couldn't possibly understand what I was going through. Story 18. I hope my mom answers this one. What a fun note to end on. In all seriousness, I keep going back to what I said earlier about how a lot of the people devouring Reddit drama seem to skew younger. That's part of why so many responses on here were from the kids who got disowned, even though the question was aimed at the parents. It makes me wonder about the parents who did answer and whether their kids were looking at this thread. It also makes me wonder how many kids whose parents ran out on them when they were young wound up scrolling through this thread in hopes they'd see a familiar detail and gain some sort of closure. The truth is, there isn't always closure in these sorts of stories. Sometimes people do bad things that ruin you for life, and you're just sort of stuck with that. But hey, hope you're having a festive holiday season. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.